This episode of Rick and Rick is brought to you by Taskin, the first name in ultra-stylish, premium quality travel gear, like the Taskin Denali 4-wheel carry-on, featuring a sleek, jet black exterior, distinctive matte finish, exceptionally smooth rubberized wheels, and compact, lightweight form factor. Taskin Denali is one of the most stylish and versatile carry-ons anywhere. Save 30% on your next purchase when you use the promo code R&R Take 30. That's R&R Take 30 at TaskinSF.com.
It's an honor just to be nominated, honey chunk. So buckle up and we'll fix it in post. Cause you're just in time for an all-new episode of Rick and Rick Rule the World.
Welcome to a Rick and episode of Rick and Rick Rule the World. I'm Rick Matheson, and this time out, it's Rick and Ann, as in Ann Faricy, Chief Strategy Officer for New York City-based strategic and creative consultancy Nuance Collective, and is a veteran marketer with nearly 20 years of experience in brand strategy at agencies like RPA, Goodby Silverstein and Partners, and more, which makes her perfect for our topic of conversation today, a look at the state of consumer marketing in 2026 through the prism of last month's Academy Awards advertising. Welcome to the show, Ann.
Thanks, Rick. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, great to connect. And before we dive in, why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself and Nuance Collective?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. My name's Ann Faricy. Like you said, I've spent a couple of decades in the business in Colorado, California, a little bit abroad, and now back working in the US at the Nuance Collective. And my partners and I built a strategy and creative consultancy that we realized that we love the business of advertising and marketing and didn't love some of the processes. So kind of removed all of the bloat and some of the timeline and expenses. And we just operate a really clean model and are largely AI based when it matters and still do kind of some of the old school, photo shoots and that kind of thing when it makes sense as well.
Awesome. Well, your listeners may not realize this, but the Academy Awards is actually one of the most important live televised events for marketers, maybe behind only the Super Bowl each year.
Absolutely.
For brands reaching certain consumer demographics, it's also a steal at something like $2 to $3 million per 30 seconds of airtime versus whatever it was, $8 to $10 million for the Super Bowl this year. Now, there's some overlap in demographics, but Ann, is it safe to say that the Academy Awards skews toward affluent women, 18 to 49, brands in categories like luxury, beauty, auto, finance, pharma, and I guess some retail too. Is that fair to say?
I would say so, yes.
Great. Now, I want to get your reaction to this. An unintuitive to me anyway, brand spending during this year's show was Burger King, which is in the midst of a rebrand. I didn't watch the broadcast, but I did see a spot. I don't know if it was the only spot, but it was how BK is now sort of doing away with the king character and making the customer king, which I thought was A, a nice message, and B, enables a future rebrand to bring him back. But I was a little surprised that they chose the Oscars. But what's your view? Was this a smart buy?
While some of the, like you said, some of the brands or industries might appear sort of female targeted on the surface, I think in a lot of ways, just culturally speaking, we are removing sort of a gender bias when it comes to messaging. I think specifically BK is a great example to start with because the whole premise of the rebrand is kind of this mea culpa, saying, gosh, the whole industry of fast food really took a nosedive and we were no exception, and sort of calling out where they misstepped and they stopped paying attention to quality or customer service. And the images that you saw during that storytelling were not gender biased. I don't think, they were men and women, and a lot of it was, historical footage and sort of the evolution of the brand and the evolution of sort of people's relationship with the brand. So I would say that they did a nice job of, and to be honest, I think a brand like that, maybe their only hope for a rebrand was that step, right? Like was the admission of, gosh, we're here to do better.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bold campaign. And I think BK's new CEO, Tim Curtis, seemed to really want to make this more than just a creative rebrand, but also kind of revamp some of the fundamentals in terms of quality of food and also quality of service.
Right. Yes.
Now, I don't want to dwell too much on fast food, but I take it that McDonald's didn't run a video of its CEO trying to pretend like he can stomach a Big Mac.
I didn't either.
I did not see anything around McDonald's, but for all the stuff around BK, I feel like it may have gotten upstaged by social posts I saw of Michael B. Jordan, going into In-N-Out after the show with his Oscar statue. A spectacular case of unearned publicity for In-N-Out. But then I was wondering, well, wait a second. they had a press line, and photographers on hand. I started to wonder, did In-N-Out hire him to do this? Do you know?
I don't know, but I do know that was quite the social thread for sure.
Wow, what a great idea for him and great for In-N-Out, especially if they didn't hire him to do it.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, we're both parents, and I'm not sure the 1.5-minute spot from Disney Cruise Lines that was called Midnight Magic. I'm not sure it was totally great, but I certainly felt it.
I agree.
Yeah, it was a dad with a little kid. They're on a cruise. They wake up in the middle of the night and kind of leave the family behind in the cabin and go for a stroll on the cruise and have just a great time. And then returning on the cruise over several years, or is the boy going through different stages of growing up where now he doesn't want to hang out with dad.
Yes.
Then finally, years later, dad's gray, and here's a knock on the cabin door, and there's his son with his granddaughter.
Yes.
And I felt it. It worked on me, even though I can't say it was a great spot. I felt it.
I totally agree. 1.5 is a long time to hold anybody's attention. But I agree because, and it's certainly more a biased personal anecdote because that is like my biggest fear. My kids are 6 and I'm like dreading no, I'm just going to hang out here. I'm good.
Yeah, you got to hate that point in like 6th or 7th grade when, they start to say things like, Dad, can you maybe just drop me off at the corner?
Yeah. And we went to Disneyland for our first time in November, and my husband and I were both bracing for just the chaos and the terror and because we knew it was not going to be like the ads, right?
Right.
And it was neither. It was in between, and it was lovely.
That's awesome. Now, beyond that, this particular one kind of striking a chord with us, a lot of the spots felt kind of too strategized, too constructed. And you had a reaction to the L'Oreal campaign doing the show.
I did. I just think that, I think there is we could do a whole conversation on this about just, beauty and culture and how it's showing up, but specifically around the Oscars, which is the event, right, for fashion and beauty and that kind of thing. 2 things I noticed. In a positive way, the conversation on the red carpet, and I didn't catch all of it, but the ones that I did not focus on what are you wearing, who designed this? And it was not focused on aesthetics. The question was, what are you working on? Tell us where you're spending your time. What are you producing?
Right.
That is a shift. That's how it should have been, right? You see all of those clips over the last few years of men being interviewed like women, and they think it's hysterical. Which shoes are you wearing?
Yes.
Who's taking care of your children? That kind of thing. But that was, I think, a really nice shift to see.
Yeah.
My point about talking about, I think that beauty brands have a huge opportunity to show up on this. They have the stage, they have the mic in these kind of settings. And I think they didn't make a big enough statement. I know that L'Oreal did a kind of a tie-in with Devil Wears Prada that felt just weak, a little bit flimsy.
Yeah.
And then I think they had an amazing opportunity to talk about sort of how I think beauty is shifting more from aspirational to like actually holding up in real life. And so some of those, the storyline of the spot with stunt actors and actresses and sort of like how the makeup can last. Let's just like really make it very elementary. I think there are a ton of different ways they could have done that perhaps a little bit better. Either lean far more into the cinematic aspect or far more into real life, but it just kind of felt like amateur show in between for an iconic global brand at the Oscars.
Given that they did this tie-in with Devil Wears Prada 2, that is a career-focused movie. Did they not lean into that enough or too much, or was it just too scripted, too manufactured?
I think too many things going on. They have Kendall Jenner, who's their beautiful spokesperson of L'Oreal Paris. She played the character that Anne Hathaway plays, Andy, and comes in and the guy doesn't recognize her. And it's a duplicate of kind of a very, now famous scene where I think a couple different directions would have been cool is to, see kind of how their very famous tagline, you're worth it, has changed context for where we are today as a culture. Or again, the fact that they were talking about in one of their spots, I think the point they were trying to make is that these are products that hold up during things like stunts over and over and over in these all-day takes in movies. That they could have gone really cinematic into like actual footage perhaps, or gone really real life and made it incredibly relatable, similar to the Disney spot where maybe it wasn't like a great spot, but if you can relate to that scenario, it will speak to you.
You almost have to invent some connective tissue because they are selling makeup, the cosmetics, that kind of thing.
Well, and that's the thing is that they have to have the practice or the philosophy or the action in place as a brand to make that believable. But the real thing that you and I are circling right now is that we as humans, I think, are captivated by attention that brands, I think, are a little bit slow and scared to hold. They always we want to like resolve it. We want to fix it to show that we optimize, or we do this, or we make you more beautiful, or, all of the things. You and I know all the like advertising tips and tricks, right? We know the playbook. But I think what is a little bit scarier now for marketers is that there isn't a playbook. I kind of laugh. I'll be honest. I laugh when I hear best practices. To me, I think that collection of like mediocre data a lot of times.
Yes.
That and it's more about averages and volume than it is at all best in class.
Yeah. It's too much of a moving target right now. And in some ways, the broader culture is moving a little too fast and sometimes backward. There's a lot of landmines now, unfortunately, for folks, rightly or wrongly, or usually wrongly, but they've got to navigate them nonetheless. And when you and I were talking a few weeks before the Oscars, the war in Iran had just started. And I think I joked, somewhere there is a brand and its agency panicking right now because the spot that they shot about jet dropping off, bonbons or something isn't going to work now. I have not heard anything like that, thankfully. But did you have a sense that anyone had changed course last minute? Or do you feel like what I'm hearing from you is maybe everybody's already playing things too safe?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's
not daring enough.
It's not that it's not daring enough. Well, it is, but it's sort of like, it's more like, I think, embodied enough for who you are as a brand and being actually the fullest expression of the brand, right? I think a lot of people haven't even done the work strategically to understand what that means for them.
Yeah.
But my point being that the opposite of that is not just spectacle, right? It's not like gratuitous, like graphics or claims. It's really kind of just putting a stake in the ground around who you are as a brand. I know this sounds perhaps like really elementary, but I still go back to just how we think about our relationships with one another, right? Like brands as people. We are most attracted to people who have a strong sense of self, whether it's similar to us or wildly different without being super offensive.
Yeah.
We are most drawn to those who have a strong sense of who they are. And that is something I didn't really see in a lot of this advertising. And that's really that's kind of I think the missed opportunity for beauty specifically.
What a great insight. Your sense from this Oscars and the brands advertising it didn't come off as if they actually knew who they are in today's mediascape. And it's got to be a terrifying place for brands, but also almost too predictable.
Right.
I mean, it's somewhere over the last decade, I don't know if it's, CMO tenure, the consistent vision is not there long enough. And so they go from one CMO to the next. And you were talking about Burger King earlier. It seems like the CEO's in a good direction. But the joke I made about, it got rid of the king so that a couple of years from now, the next rebrand can bring the king back.
Right.
So, maybe that's it. They need to figure out who they are. And, it may potentially, it's the nature of the Oscars. Maybe in some ways, like the Super Bowl, they view it too much as a one-off. And that could be a problem too.
It also, it might be for the same reason of that, like media context of it being, such a huge stage that, gosh, like, again, well, but this goes into, maybe too scared to hold that tension. If it is a misstep, oh my gosh, it's been this huge cultural blunder when, honestly, I don't even think like those of us in the industry care too much.
Right. We overthink it.
We overthink it. Yeah, exactly.
Nobody else cares, Anyway, now there was a spot, and you mentioned earlier, like some of the ads were trying to be cinematic and some of them had A stars. I thought Panera had a interesting take. I think the commercial was something great. And it was by 72 and Sunny, New York. And it was a Panera cafe. And they were showing that it's not just a place to have a meal or share a meal or drink coffee. It was a place where someone might be working on their first screenplay. And I liked that because it seemed on point.
Yes. I totally agree. And I actually was surprised that Starbucks wasn't the one to do something like that. And I thought that Starbucks had kind of a womp womp.
Yeah.
Just kind of a nothing. But I thought that Panera did a good job of using cinema, the context of the night appropriately and not trying to make it look like it was a film set, right? Or not trying to make it kind of this tie-in to things that I think we saw with like Mazda and L'Oreal, et cetera. They took the approach of using a really lovely human insight and human behavior where you go to like work on something. Could be fantastic. Could be part of this night in a bigger context, years from now. So I thought that was a lovely expression of that.
Exactly. Yeah. Great idea. Yeah. And on point. And the award goes to.
I agree.
When we come back from the short break, we'll continue our conversation about the state of consumer marketing through the prism of the 2026 Academy Awards with Ann Faricy, Chief Strategy Officer of Nuance Collective. Stay tuned.
This episode of Rick and Rick is brought to you by Taskin, the first name in ultra-stylish, premium quality travel gear like the Taskin Denali 4-wheel carry-on. Featuring a sleek, jet black exterior, distinctive matte finish, exceptionally smooth rubberized wheels, and compact, lightweight form factor, Taskin Denali is one of the most stylish and versatile carry-ons anywhere. Save 30% on your next purchase when you use the promo code R&R Take 30. That's R&R Take 30 at TaskinSF.com.
We are back, Rick and Rick Rule the World, with Rick Matheson and our guest, Ann Faricy, Chief Strategy Officer of New York-based Nuance Collective, talking about the microcosmic view into the state of consumer marketing captured in last month's Academy Awards broadcast, one of the year's most important live televised events for marketers, behind really only the Super Bowl. Another category with a pretty strong presence in this year's Oscars was Big Pharma. What did it tell us about the state of the consumer republic through the lens of this year's Oscars?
I think something that was so interesting was the amount of pharma ads. The other thing I thought was so interesting was just like you cannot ignore the all of the GLP-1 and the
Yes.
That class of the advertising around there. I think has so many misses. Well,
Yes.
first of all, I had never seen pharmaceutical comparisons like brand to brand the way that you would see from like a car manufacturer in terms of like safety or fuel economy. It was like Zepbound compared themselves to, is it Wegovy, or like Zepbound being a GLP and the other one being a semaglutide, that people on Zepbound lost 44 pounds versus 33 pounds and blah, blah, blah. And what all of them are missing is people who are on these, it is changing their entire like dopamine reward system. Their alcohol consumption has wildly decreased. Their appetite, the size they are, has become almost backseat to some of these other huge changes that are biologically and economically super significant. And this is not based around branding. It's just like biology driven, which I think is a really fascinating like cultural rewiring that the pharmaceutical companies are missing being part of that story that they created.
Yeah. There's this whole knock-on effect in a good way. I mean, restaurants are scaling down the size of their dishes because of this.
Yes.
Maybe they've tested and said, no, just keep it on, one track. But couldn't these same ads, the way they are now, have just been Weight Watchers 10 years ago, 20 years ago? I mean, I'm not feeling like there's anything different.
I agree.
Okay, so let's sum up themes here. So playing it safe, try to be cinematic. Some of them hit, some of them didn't. I feel like Super Bowl, it's like, okay, it's puppies, it's humor, and for me, the Oscars seems like it should be around achieving your dreams, whatever
Yes.
it is. Doesn't have to be movie related, bonus points if there's a nice tie-in like Panera did, but achieving your dreams, and none of these spots were quite there.
I totally agree. And a theme that I think can be very like moving and emotional around the Oscars is this theme of unity and this industry, right? And making magic and people, achieving their dreams. And that is really magical and really special. And I am a huge lover of words. And so I caught a couple of just like of the lines that people said during their speeches or have just some dialogue around there. But I think, Jessie Buckley had like a beautiful tribute to motherhood. And she talked about like, this is to the beautiful chaos of a mother's heart. K-pop talked about like, I'm so sorry it took so long to see us in a movie, to the Korean culture. And Michael B. Jordan even, gave all of the gentlemen before him, Will Smith, Denzel Washington, all of those, as did, oh gosh, who was the one she won Best Cinematographer? And she asked all the women in the room to stand up and saying that I'm not here without you. One of the clips that I've seen going around social media that I just think is really cool is the split screen, and it shows Tiana Taylor and Amy Madigan. One lost to the other in the Golden Globes, then opposite in the Oscars. And it showed them truly I think very credibly, so wildly excited for the other. And that I just think was a really lovely sentiment that you saw in some of the speeches and in different moments throughout the show. That was cool to have that circulated through social after the fact. It's yet again another indicator of just how desperate we are as humans to feel something, to be moved. That's why we watch movies, right? And I think we want to hear a story we haven't heard before. We want to see a new take on it in a new voice, something we want to be surprised and moved. And I think that is something that should always be part of every brief.
Exactly. Perfect. And great way to close this off here. So, Ann Faricy, I just want to thank you. Again, it is Ann Faricy, the Chief Strategy Officer at the Nuance Collective. And I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Rick, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Until next time, keep on kicking ass and keep on coming back to the one show where almost everybody's name is Rick and everybody rules the world.